Our girl is destitute.
What conspiracy theory do you have?
You're the Feyre.
I'm Feyre. He hates Tamlin. He's also a bit of a petty bitch.
And yet, she decides, let me just shoot my shot and see it. I'm like, girl.
Off to a great start here. Well, on that note, hi.
Hi. I honestly don't think the episode could have started in any better
No.
way. I feel like we're
No.
really letting everyone know where we're at right now.
It's also just so funny to me because I was just telling you that Mercury retrograde starts on Friday. So, yay, technology shit going wrong.
Yeah, and it is currently like hailing outside of my window right now, team. So just want to go ahead and apologize now for any weird sounds you might be hearing. It's a blustery day. in old
Blustery.
France. Yeah, it's blustery, and if you see my eye, if I go like this, like it's just because like I'm watching. I have a whole other show happening right in front of me. So
We were just saying if we don't include it, hopefully Corinne doesn't get Final Destination by hail just like coming through.
straight into the face. Yeah, yeah. Hi, friends.
How are you
Hi.
guys? How are like they can talk back?
I
How are
know.
you?
Okay, I'm tired.
Yeah.
My brain is not fully working currently. I had quite a morning.
I was going to say, I think this is the perfect way to introduce our new little segment we're going to do. So, if you're here with us having read the books, you already know what the phrase Cauldron Save Us or Cauldron Save Me means. For those who haven't read the books, I won't spoil it. It's not a real big spoiler, but just know it's kind of like our world equivalent of saying like, "Oh, Lord help me," or like something along those lines. So, we thought it'd be fun at the beginning of every episode to basically ask each other, what has you today, this week, this year, whatever it is, saying, oh, Cauldron Save Me. So, Corinne, it sounds like you've had a morning. I'm guessing that's what has you saying Cauldron Save Me.
Yeah, my Cauldron Save Me moment was very, very real. I totally thought I was going to say a different thing today, but I went on a run in my neighborhood. And, you know, when I leave, there's always like, I have a vest that I wear that I hold my water. And so it holds my phone, it holds my keys, it holds like all the stuff. And so I go out on my run, have a nice run. Always fun to run in the rain, but also kind of kicked my ass because I'm like working on like speed right now. So anyway, go on my run. Wasn't super happy with how it went. So I'm coming back a little bit, you know. Come to the door, look for my keys.
Oh no. Oh no.
I can't find my keys. And so I have this moment of like, okay, it's fine. I'll just have Jeff let me in. Oh, wait, Jeff's at work. Okay, cool. I'll just have my downstairs neighbors let me in, and then I'll like go through the bottom of my house and then come through the backyard.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I deadbolted all the doors before I left.
No.
Okay, cool. Look down at my phone. Oh, I have 2% left on my phone.
Corinne!
Cool. So I literally had this moment where I was just like, Cauldron fucking save me. What the fuck? Are you kidding me? Also, side note, this is not the first time. Call my partner, tell him what's going on. And he's just like, I mean, I can leave this tech scout like really early to come get you. And then I realized, well, you know, I took my vest off in the middle of my run because I got really hot to take my jacket off. What if it flew out of my vest and landed in the park? Power walk to the park, get to the park, quick scan. All of a sudden, in the distance, on the ground, in the middle of a puddle,
you found it.
I see my keys, all of them, just there. And I was just like, are you joking? So then I call my partner and I'm like, hey, so I found my keys. And he's like, cool, because I haven't left yet. I'm like, sweet, don't worry about it. I'm good. And then to power walk back, so another mile, and then I get inside.
I mean, if that's not a cringy moment, I don't know what is. Well, I'm so sorry you went through that, but I'm so glad that, I mean, like, especially in like a city like San Francisco, I
Yeah.
feel, but thinking again, like it is Golden Gate Park. So it
Well,
kind of does.
well, that's actually the thing. It wasn't Golden Gate Park. It was Suture Heights
Oh,
Park. Yeah,
oh,
which is
okay.
a very less frequented park.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the reason why. And also I started
Yeah.
realizing, like, if you saw a bunch of keys on the ground, I don't think I would touch them because I would be
Yeah.
like, that person's gonna come back and look for them right there.
Right.
It
Right.
was just
Unless
more like,
like, I was gonna
oh,
say, unless like you like took them to like the police station or something.
right,
Yeah.
right, right. So that was just more of like, what? So that's why my brain's like a little fried because I had like 30 minutes of like really freaking out and just being like, I'm gonna have to like hang out till my partner's home from work. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be able to tell Ariel we have to push the podcast because my phone's gonna die. Like, what is
Well,
happening?
hey, thank the mother. It worked
Thank
out.
the mother, thank the cauldron. We're
Thank
here. We're together. Okay. What was your
God.
cauldron save us or
Okay.
save me moment?
Well, so it's been about a month and a half since we last recorded. A lot has happened. Our country is burning. That's been real fun.
Mhm.
Um, I had one of the worst ear infections of my life for like
Oh,
2 weeks. That sucked. I could barely hear out of my right ear for most of that time. Uh, I got a new tattoo, which have I showed you my new tattoo yet?
I've only seen pictures. Oh my god, it's so cool.
Thank you. For those who don't know, that is from Twin Peaks. It's in honor of the love of my film life, David Lynch, who passed away very sadly in January. So I got that like a week after in a well, I made the appointment in a manic state and was like, I need to pay tribute to him on my body somehow. Um, but that is not my Cauldron Save Me. My Cauldron Save Me today is happy. So since our last recording, I finished all the books in the Massverse. I finished Kingdom of Ash. I'm not even going to get into that because that could be a whole podcast episode in and of itself. I am obsessed. Throne of Glass is officially, I think, my favorite Sarah J. Maas series. It's so good. If you haven't read it, for the love of God, please read it. But
Lit.
I had this mixed feeling of like being so excited. I could like finally talk to you, especially about like everything in the Massverse.
Mhm.
I could safely go on Instagram Reels and TikTok and be like, nothing will be spoiled, yay! So that was exciting. And then I immediately felt sad because I'm like, what do I do now, right? I knew I did make a promise to David because we made a bargain of our own. I told him if he reads all of ACOTAR, I will read the first Dune book. So I did that. It's fine. Not really my thing. I get why it's like a big sci-fi book. I understand that. But it is what it is. But I finished that on Friday. Today's Wednesday. Same day I started The Fourth Wing.
Yeah.
And I think I'm like 3/4 of the way done already. Last night we had a smut landing. Houston, we have a smut landing. I won't spoil, but for those who have read it, I got to the post-war games scene. Um, you know,
Mm.
very spicy. Yeah, I've been waiting for that. It took a while to get there, but we got there. And it was great. It was pretty great. So I'm in the Fourth Wing now. Very excited to read. I don't remember what the next one is called.
Iron Flame.
Iron Flame.
Iron
Thank you.
Flame's the next one,
Ooh.
and then Onyx Storm is the one that just came out.
I mean, everyone was losing their shit over Onyx Storm. Very excited. I'm curious to see what that will entail because like she keeps talking about how a certain someone's eyes are onyx. So I'm like, okay.
Yep.
So very excited. Because like I don't know if listeners know this yet, but like I'm very new to romantasy. Like ACOTAR was my first romantic. I mean, I guess unless you count Twilight, which I read in high
Well,
school.
which, like, honestly, there is a whole joke
Yeah.
about the pipeline of like, hey, you people who grew up reading Twilight, how's your romantasy obsession, or how's your ACOTAR obsession right now? Like, it's very real.
Yeah.
Like we
I mean,
started young.
I was such a little twihard when I was younger. Like, went to the first ever convention, front row, like that level of obsessed. Um, all this to say, yeah, the
Ooh,
pipeline from Twilight teenagers to ACOTAR adults. Ooh, that was a fun alliteration. Um,
it was a good alliteration.
I mean, it's real. It's
It's
very
very
real.
real.
So, yeah, all this to say, I am somewhat new to romantasy, right? At least as an adult. And so ACOTAR was like my first real adult romantasy series.
Hmm.
And so now Fourth Wing, because like I guess Crescent City I would consider romantasy. I mean, I guess all three series, but like they're just not they're not as smutty
I
as
mean,
ACOTAR.
I would actually argue that Throne of Glass is far more just a fantasy series.
Yeah, yeah. It's more
And
Game of Thronesy
yeah,
than
because
ACOTAR.
and then honestly, it's because of what we talked about of where
Yeah.
it's a series that was meant for a younger audience,
Yes.
and so it sort of went through that way.
Right.
And I mean, I would also bring up too that I don't feel like you've also read like a crazy amount of fantasy either.
No.
Yeah,
No.
so that's I think another thing to add into this is that it's like you're like
New.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I've never read, well, I tried in middle school reading Lord of the Rings and couldn't get through it. I'd be curious to try now. Dune was interesting because that's sci-fi fantasy, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So that was actually really, and funny enough, reading Dune was like right after finishing the Massverse was so interesting because I'm like, oh,
Mm,
she's so inspired by Dune. Like one thing, I don't think this is a spoiler because like it just I don't think it is. But we get at some point we meet priestesses in
yeah,
ACOTAR.
yeah.
Um, I I think one could make the argument that she may have pulled some inspiration for one specific priestess, at least, that we meet
Mm,
from the Bene Gesserits in Dune.
interesting. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
see that.
yeah.
I see that.
So there's
Uh,
there's little references.
yeah, I would another interesting thing though is like priestesses and fantasy books. Dude,
Yeah,
you're fucking everywhere.
they're like this.
Yeah, I mean honestly,
Yeah,
because I mean in most fantasy they still normally exist in a space where there's someone has a religion somewhere.
right, right.
And I think a lot of fantasy people are always trying to step away from like the idea of priests. They
Yeah,
normally fantasy does tend to have more females in particular positions and stuff like that. So, dude, priestesses in fantasy is just like so fucking real. But I agree with you of the specific connection. I that's actually kind of interesting.
well, it's
I'm
kind
not.
of like because like Dune was like the first like big sci-fi fantasy, right? Like the book, not the movie. Because that came before like Star Wars and everything.
Okay,
And like
I was literally trying to figure out like when did Dune come out
60s. I
because
think 65 was when the book was published, but it was actually it was like a serialized thing in like newspapers at first. So he
oh
wrote yeah, Frank
cool.
Herbert wrote them as like little like just little I don't know what you call it in like the newspaper and then eventually published the
Like
book.
short
So yeah,
stories.
that came yeah, short stories. And then yeah, published the book I think in 65.
Well,
Then Star Wars came out.
so that's actually a lot of how most science fiction literature
Yeah.
started was that
Yeah.
they were serials in
Right.
newspapers. And a lot of those collections later got put into books or it was like that with Dune where there were particular writers who like finished a novel through those serials and they would be put together into like a full length novel. So that's actually really 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 cool. I had no idea that Dune had that like backstory. That's really cool.
One thing I want to bring up before we get into
Yes.
the chapters of this week is we originally were planning this where each episode there was going to be the spoiler half and or the non-spoiler half first and the spoiler half all in one episode. And then I edited it. I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be too long. I think we have to separate these into two episodes of their own." So that's what we're going to be doing from now on is we're going to have a non-spoiler episode and then a spoiler episode all coming out on the same day. So, you know, you'll get both at the same time, but we're yappers. What can I say? Like, I mean, and also I think what's fun about it is something we realized is the non-spoiler half, we can get, because we're focusing on those chapters and any chapters that came before, we can get really into like literary analysis, which is really fun. And then the spoiler half, aside from being a spoiler half, we can kind of just gab. You know what I mean? It's a little more gossipy, I'll
Yeah.
say. So just know that going forward, we're going to be splitting it into two. And hopefully that works.
Yeah. I think it makes it a little bit more fair for our spoiler or for our non-spoiler friends too, because then the episode ends and they're done. They don't have to worry about like shutting it off before we start fucking going
Right.
off.
And then also it makes it easier, hopefully, if you guys who are reading along, having never read the books before, to come back when you
Mhm.
have read all the books.
Mm.
Speaking of which, shall we dive in to the chapters for this week?
Heck yeah.
We're going to start with chapter 4. So where we last left off, this big hulking thing was in the doorway, right? And we find out this thing in this chapter is a big old wolf. Not the wolf that Feyre killed, obviously. She skinned that guy, but a different wolf, who we get confirmed is a Fae.
Yeah.
And not only is he Fae, the original wolf that Feyre shot was also Fae. Dun, dun, dun.
And like I love the description of the big Fae. He's very much giving Beast from Beauty and the
Yes.
Beast. Like when she talks about like the fucking horns and shit, because also she says how like the body is very feline, but
Yeah.
the face is very wolfish, which is like almost exactly what the Beast looks like in Beauty and the Beast. His body is very like lion and his face is like full wolf. So
Yeah.
so that was very like, yes, giving Beast, love it, which, you know, and also with that like romanticy mind, you're kind of like, oh, what's gonna happen here?
No, I the description of this wolf is fucking terrifying.
It's really scary. Yeah.
And like also just like aside from his size, like just the fact that he talks
Oh.
while in beast form. Like
Dude,
what?
like the first page of chapter 4 in the like full capital of like murderers, like literally one of my first notes is like it talks, like it's like there is, I completely agree with you, there's something about that makes it like extra terrifying, because you're like, oh fuck, you can speak, no. Yeah.
Well, and just I'm just like putting myself into Feyre's mind frame, right? Like, especially because this is Sarah J. Maas's only series where it's in first person. Most of it's in first person.
Mm-hmm.
And so like we're really in her head and just thinking about like what must have been going through it of like, okay, there's this big wolf in the doorframe. Oh God, it can talk. Oh, that means it's a Fae. Oh, that means that one was a Fae. Uh-oh. Like, well, and it kind of leads in a little bit into like what my first note was, which is going back to her family, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I wrote down the quote where it says, my sister screamed, kneeling against the wall of the hearth. My father crouched in front of them, another body for me to defend. And I'm like, yeah, like, once again, she's the hero of the family. Like, she's immediately thinking about, like, what do I do? Okay, my bow and quiver is on the other side of the cabin. Like, I'm going to use this dinner knife, even though it's not going to do shit. She looks for iron. She even thinks, like, maybe I can throw one of my sister's bracelets at it. Like, she hurls the fucking knife. Like, she is the one. Oh, and she's the only one who tells this thing to actually get out, right?
Yeah.
Like, none of them, like, Elaine's just screaming. Nessa's kind of just screaming too. The dad's just, like, cowering. Meanwhile, little baby Feyre, who once again, she's
Dude,
18, 19? I always forget. 19?
18 or not, I think 19.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Something.
I think they say it in a later chapter.
She's
don't
still
really
a teenager, basically.
Yeah.
Like, she's the one
dude.
doing all this. And I'm like, guys, like, I get this is scary, but like, get it the fuck together.
Dude,
you know?
dude, it's insane because literally, like, I think it's such a perfect thing. And like literally the beginning of chapter 4, she says like, I didn't have room for terror, wouldn't give it an inch of space, despite my heart's wild pounding in my ears. Somehow I wound up in front of my sisters, even as the creature reared onto its hind legs and bellowed. Like, bitch is fucking terrified. And I love that Sarah tells us she's scared. But she knows she doesn't have the time or the space. She goes straight into this like, how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to save people? How are we going to like, oh God, Feyre's so fucking cool. Like, because also it's showing this whole idea of like bravery is actually fighting through your fear. It's not having fear. Courage is about acknowledging, or even this, she didn't even really like acknowledge. She's kind of like, I'm scared. Nope, can't do it. Bypassing this. Like, but yeah, it's like, oh God, she's so cool because like, yeah, she's immediately looking for all the spaces. Yeah, like she's looking for a boat, blah, 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 blah. She even like talks about how like she can like, she's like looking for his weaknesses. She talks about like his neck looks like a really good spot. She could throw it and like all this stuff. And like, and yeah, her family, yeah, they're again not doing anything. It's like I think I wrote here, yeah, like she only sees her family as something to defend, not fellow defenders. She doesn't, they're not a team. Here are the people I have to like protect, which is we already talked about in the first episode, which is like literally pretty much what she's doing her entire life right now. And it's, oh man, it's like, it's so heartbreaking because you're just like, every time you're like, nope, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything.
She all but says they're dead weight. I think one of the parts that made me the most sad about this chapter is like, but I knew with a sudden uncoiling clarity that Nesta would buy Elaine time to run. Not my father, whom she resented with her entire steely heart. Not me, because Nesta had always known and hated that she and I were two sides of the same coin and that I could fight my own battles. But Elaine, the flower grower, the gentle heart, Nesta would go down swinging for her, which I think this establishes even more about Nesta than some of the stuff said in the first 3 chapters. It definitely sets up for one of the later books, I'll say. And like, it's this I have such mixed feelings about it. Like, I think I said this in the first episode, like, I completely, and I'll like defend Nesta's feelings towards her father because like, even in this chapter, I'm like, man, Papa Archeron, like, you really are kind of a deadbeat dad. Like, you just don't do anything, right? So that I get. Nesta's feelings towards Feyre, it's kind of this like, it's one of those like what do they call this, like kind of double-edged compliments of like, Nesta knows, and she's right, Feyre is the only one who could, like, especially compared to Elaine, right? Like Elaine couldn't do shit at this point in the series of like defending herself against a Fae. Feyre could. Feyre's the only one of them who could. But she also says Nesta had always known and hated that she and I were two sides of the same coin. Yeah. Which, like, this, again, it gets talked about in one of the later books, but, like, it's this thing of, like, is Nesta jealous of Feyre, or does she just hate that Feyre has become like her because she hates herself? And that I have very mixed feelings on, because it's, I mean, it's no secret that Nesta is truly a piece of shit at the beginning of it, and for most of the series, to be honest. But like, she's a complicated woman, is what I'll say. And she's not always good. And I think this is one of like those shining examples of how Nesta just really can be shitty, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though, because as you're talking, I'm slowly starting to view this moment of Nesta protecting Elaine like a little differently, actually, because if we're looking at it from the standpoint of that, Nesta actually completely does believe in the ability of Feyre, right? Like we've even though she gives her shit in the beginning, she's still asking for Feyre for all this shit. So she clearly knows that Feyre can like handle a certain level. Yeah. So if we're looking at it from that standpoint, and if Nesta is viewing the situation and she's like, okay, Feyre's got this up there. Someone's got to protect Elaine back here
Yeah.
because this guy isn't going to.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's like this weird thing where I'm starting to feel now of like, is it really that bad that Nesta stayed back and like protected Elaine?
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I think there's a little column A, column B here. It's like very disappointing that no one even attempts to stand up for Feyre. I mean,
Right.
okay, the dad kind of does.
Kinda, yeah. We'll get to that next.
Yeah, like lightweight he
Yeah.
does. But not to any, it's not very
It's not significant enough.
exactly.
Right?
It's not significant enough. And it's like, but yeah, like no one really even attempts. I mean, maybe when Elaine's like, we didn't kill anybody or like whatever, like maybe, but still no one really like steps forward or tries to even like be next to her to like help her. And that's
No.
really upsetting. She even talks about how it's like a gut, it's like a knife in the gut, or like there's a lot of like that kind of imagery when she like sees these other moments happening. But so it's very disappointing. But then on the other side, you're like, well, maybe Nesta was looking at it from like a zone defense.
No, totally. You know what it reminds me so much of? It like I personally experienced this, especially like in college, of like that professor or teacher who was like really hard on you and they're
Mm-hmm.
like was giving you so many notes on like your script or paper, whatever it is, but they're not giving like so and so over here as much shit. And then in hindsight, like later on, you realize like, oh, they did that because they believed in me, but they didn't really believe in that other student, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's kind of a bigger insult in that towards
Yeah.
the other like it is kind of in a weird way more of an insult towards Elaine,
Yeah.
right? Of like, yeah, she can't defend herself.
No, she
Like,
can't.
and even though I do, in this, we find out this more and more through the series, but like, there definitely is favoritism from Nesta towards Elaine. Like, that is unquestionable. And I think
Yeah.
that's where the hurt comes from. It's
Yeah.
not like she loves them equally. Nesta doesn't. Like, she does love Elaine more.
It's that she'll pick Elaine.
Exactly. She'll
Yeah.
always pick Elaine.
She'll always pick Elaine.
But there is this kind of weird double-edged compliment of like,
Mhm.
yeah, but I'm also doing it because I know Feyre can survive and none of us can. So it sets up so much for that relationship between Nesta and Feyre. And I think it's like, again, it's just like such a testament to Sarah J. Maas's writing of like, she sets it up so early that, and it pays off so well later on, right? Going back to Papa Archeron though, like when you said like he kind of tries, like he says, please, good sir, Feyre is my youngest. I beseech you to spare her. She is all, and then just kind of trails off. And Feyre says, but whatever he meant to say died in his throat as the beast roared again.
Yeah.
And that part killed me because like I feel, and I think she, from what I assess from what she says, when she says, whatever he meant to say died off, I think he was going to say, she's all we have to survive.
Yeah, me too.
Or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And that's, again, I know we talked about this in the last episode, like we have no doubt that Papa Archeron loves Feyre. Like he I mean, in their goodbye, like, he literally says, you were always too good for here, Feyre, too good for us, too good for everyone. If you ever escape, ever convince them that you've paid the debt, don't return. Don't ever come back. You go somewhere new and you make a name for yourself. Like, even though she takes that moment as kind of an insult, like, I think we as the readers know he's like, no, you are too good for us. Like, please go make a better life for yourself. And that is, I think, one of the few redeemable moments he has, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it just going back to that like moment where he was about to say she's all we have to survive. Yes, he loves her, but I think he sees her more as a means to an end, right? And that's kind of the cruelty of it, of like, and I think that there's a lot of people who experience this within their own families, within other relationships, of like, you can be loved by someone and they still see you as a means to an end. And that's the tragedy, I think, of the Archeron family,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, they see you as like a like how do you phrase it? It's like they see you only for what you can provide them.
Yeah.
And if you are not able to provide that, what is your worth?
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense for him in particular because he was a merchant, right? Like that's
Mhm.
his whole job is he deals in value.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, oh, now I'm realizing like I think that's how he assesses his daughters is what value do they give to me? The reason Elaine is his favorite is because she dotes on him the most, right?
Mhm.
She strokes his ego. And we see this later on too. Feyre, I would argue, is the second favorite because she provides food, she provides money, like she gets them out of like she helps them survive. And then Nesta's obviously his least favorite because she hates him,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's a thing where it's like I think it's natural in some ways to feel that way towards people like, when someone likes you, you're going to probably like them as well or like them more than people who don't like you. But when you're a parent,
Yeah.
that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm not a parent, so I can't say it, but it's like, I don't like the whole playing favorites thing. I don't think
Yep.
parents should do that. And he very clearly does. And I think that's why I don't like him.
Yeah. I mean, I do think though this is, and it's as you kind of already said it before, like this is his like one moment of like pure selflessness
Yeah.
when he literally tells her, "Don't come back."
Hmm.
Like that, and grouping that with this idea where we do think he was going to say, "She's all we have to survive," and then he tells her to not come back. That is him being like, "It doesn't matter what happened to us. You just do what you need. Go," and he even says like, "Go make something of yourself."
Yeah.
And it's like that. It's like the one real selfless moment that we've seen of him so far. And I think it does this really interesting thing that I think many of us who have maybe all types of relationships with our parents of like, it's incredible how just one statement that is like really beautiful and selfless like that can make you forget almost like everything else.
Oh, yeah.
Because what's so funny is as you were just then talking about him, I found myself like, I wanted to defend him like really badly. And I purely
Yeah.
think it's just because he says, just go.
Yeah.
Which is like, but you're right. There's all these other things. He's had so much time to prove that he is this good man. And in actuality, it is pretty easy to just be like, yeah, just don't come back.
Yeah.
Like that's a
Yeah.
very simple thing to say. And all of a sudden you seem like an incredible person. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
it is interesting. Yeah.
in Mama Mass, I mean, that becomes a whole
Yeah.
plot basically in one of the later books of like actions versus words.
Yes.
Right. And like, or even like, can one big action that someone
Mm-hmm.
does
Can it erase?
erase?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Can it? And like I think what's interesting is I feel like there's still a
Yeah.
like
I
there's
think
still kind of like a which did she really give us an answer? Like I think
yeah.
it's kind of
Ooh.
which like we'll like I'm
Yeah.
gonna like
Yeah.
nip that really quick. But the him telling her to go away kind of made me realize that we sort of like skipped over a few things of like I think this chapter and like the kind of 3 that we had to read for this week, we get a lot more like fairy information.
Oh yeah.
Right? So like we get this whole little beat of kind of discovering that mortals have been taught like fairies can't lie. Like literally page 35, Feyre's like fairies couldn't lie. All mortals knew that. So it's this sort of like folklore thing. It's just like we know this, they can't lie, blah blah blah. So that's why kind of Feyre's very like trusting of everything that he says. Then we also learn about the treaty, that there's a treaty between the humans and the Fae.
I think the treaty gets mentioned in the previous chapter, but he like talks about what's in this treaty.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like, what the treaty is basically just like how they've kept the peace between like the two between like Prithian and the human realms, basically,
Yeah.
of just like
Which
this is the punishment if you kill us or we kill you or like blah blah blah.
right. And like I think it might get mentioned in one of the later chapters that we read this week, but like for instance, like the Fae can't take humans as slaves, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the whole reason the treaty exists is they were, keeping humans as slaves, and that's why
yeah,
the war started. But the big part of this treaty that's like really important to this chapter is when the beast says, "I'll let you in on a secret, human. Prithian must claim your life in some way for the life you took from it. So as a representative of the immortal realm, I can either gut you like a swine, or you can cross the wall and live out the remainder of your days in Prithian." Which is such an interesting loophole,
yeah.
in this treaty. Like, I find it very funny that it's like, if you kill a Fae, you can either die now, or you can go live in this land that you've been taught for centuries at this point is deadly to you.
Is terrifying. Is
Right.
like full of creatures who want to eat you and kill you.
Yes. And I'm very curious to know, like, why that is. Like, why? I mean, what I'll say is we know because we read the books. We know
Right.
why it is. But um it's interesting that Feyre, well, actually no, she does question it.
Oh
And
yeah.
we'll get to that in the spoiler part. But she doesn't question it that hard, right? And I get why she doesn't. Like, he's literally like, okay, well, if you don't agree, like, we're going out back, and I'm just, you know.
Yeah.
Her main concern is like, don't do it in front of my family,
Oh
right?
my
Like, I don't
god,
want them to
dude.
have. She says, I don't want them to have to clean up my gore. Like,
Dude, that part when she's just like when she's like, please just don't do it in front of my family. There's just so many fucking moments in this chapter that you were like, God, Feyre, you don't give a shit about yourself. Like,
no,
at all. Like, she just, like, just forever thinking about her family's well being to the bitter fucking end, dude. Like, it's insane. Like, when she just, like, accepts, she's like, you know what? Okay, just do it outside, not here.
yeah.
Like, wow. Like, she's just, God, she's so, I mean,
Well,
and
she's
it's,
so duty bound, right?
oh,
Like,
yeah.
because of the promise she made her mom. But
Yeah.
she go again. We talked about this last week. Like, she goes so beyond it of like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a weird thing. It's like this weird line between duty and love, right? Because she obviously does love her family, but like in this very forced way,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all she has aside from like Isaac, who she's all she's really doing is fucking him,
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's not like, I feel like that's like, yeah, that's
yeah, it's
no.
not a like the only love she really knows is the love of her family and the love
Yeah.
she has for her family, which is what makes,
So
I mean,
sad.
that sets up the whole book,
It's so
right?
sad because, yeah, exactly, because she doesn't know what love is. She knows what like duty bound love is. She knows what responsibility love is. But she doesn't know just what like fucking just unabashed I chose you, you chose me.
Yeah.
She doesn't know. She doesn't know like what that even feels like.
You know what's really funny, and I won't go into detail so I don't spoil for people who haven't read Throne of Glass, but you know, this series was Sarah J. Maas started writing the series while she was still writing Throne of Glass, and Feyre's emotional journey between love and duty reminds me a lot of Chaos in a way.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean? Your face,
God
the
damn it, Ariel.
realization.
We don't have time for this
No,
conversation.
no, and I feel that's a good segue. I feel like we've covered chapter 4 pretty well.
Well,
Do we want to move, or
there's
is
like,
there more?
well, there's just like one or two things of just like
Yeah,
more just like businessy type. Like again, like I just think we're starting to get a little bit more of the classic fantasy info dumps in a much more fun way than I think a lot of other fantasy stuff does. Like I think I remember even talking to you about this when you first started reading this, of that she does a really good job of kind of just like peppering in this information. So
Yeah.
we have this treaty. We know that mortals have a certain understanding of like fairy. Okay, fairy. We're just gonna go back and forth on that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We know that mortals have this deep. They're like, okay, they can't lie.
That's really important.
Which I think is really important. There's also just this very. We're also really we're getting our firsthand experience of how maybe Faye actually feel about humans, right? So just like the way he's treating her, and well, and also like this moment of like this beast, how he's kind of like impressed with her too.
Yeah.
This like accepting of fate, and um how she kind of does the whole thing of like, if one didn't know he was a fairy, would this be like, she kind of tries to like negotiate, and you're kind of like,
Yeah.
all right, go off, girl, like fucking do it. But I think it's really interesting of, she has this moment, he says, you murdered my friend, murdered him, skinned his corpse, sold it at the market, and then said he deserved it, and yet you have the nerve to question my generosity. And then she's like, well, you didn't need to mention the loophole. And he goes, foolish of me to forget that humans have such low opinions of us. Do you humans no longer understand mercy?
Corinne, that is the line we're going to focus a lot on in the spoiler section because I have thoughts on that
Oh,
line.
I'm sure you do. But for this lovely section,
Yes.
I just think it's such an interesting moment because we know how humans feel about the fairies. They're terrified of them. They're very scared of them. There's all these, kind of a lot of unknowns, but overall they're like this big bad. But this is the first time we're kind of starting to see like, okay, this is how the fairies kind of feel about humans. Like this whole idea of him being like, do you not know what like mercy is? Like what the fuck are humans doing over here that you don't even understand that I'm like actually trying to save your life? And I just think it just really struck me because, and it kind of happens in chapter 5 a little bit too, and it happens a little bit in chapter 6, where we're starting to see how fairies view humans. And it's not only this, because obviously we kind of already are coming at it with this idea of that like fairies think humans are so below them,
Right.
but it's beginning this conversation of, do they think they're below them because of just life, or is it like moral compass? Is it like,
Right.
do you guys like, what the fuck? Like, you can't even see this moment I'm trying to like have for you. And also talk about the first time you've had sympathy for this wolf when he talks about, you skinned my friend. And
Yes.
that's another moment where all of a sudden you're like, oh, fuck, shit. Yeah, that's actually really fucked up. She skinned his friend. Like,
And sold his hide.
and
Like,
sold his hide. Like, so it's this page that kind of like flips you a little bit, where you're like, okay, kind of see where this beast guy's coming from. Kind of get
Yeah.
it. You're totally right. I would go on a fucking rampage if someone
Yes.
did that to you.
I don't
can't
even
even.
want to imagine if someone did that to me, like the FBI would be after you.
I, it- I, I, yep, I can't. I can't even. I can't. But like, so it's this first moment where you're sort of like, he has a point.
Yes.
He kind of has a point. And yeah, like what has happened. I mean, obviously, a lot of her mistrust is just because there is not a good trust between humans and fairies, obviously. But just, I don't know. I just thought that was an important thing to kind of like look at,
No,
because
you're
it sort of gives you this little like,
Yeah. No, and I think one thing it brings up that is important, right, is like we know, yes, technically humans and Fae are different species of beings, I guess, but the way the humans think of the Fae, and it's very understandable why, is like they have like they're basically animals, right?
yeah,
Like they have no emotions. And I feel like this beast specifically talking about friendship and mercy are two of the most human kind of feelings there can be. And it's proving to Feyre, like, oh, what we've been taught through folklore and nursery rhymes and whatever about these Faye, like, maybe it's not all true,
Yeah.
right? And we see in these subsequent chapters that we read this week of like her perception of what the Fae are and what she's been taught throughout her entire life starts to get whittled down, and she realizes, oh, there's a lot that I don't know, and humans just don't know because it's been 500 years
Yeah.
since we've been able to live side by side,
Yeah.
right? You know, most people, I think it's in chapter 5 or something, she says like people who go to Prithian don't come back
Yeah.
really. Like occasionally a children of the blessed will come back, but
Yeah.
like when they do, they're brainwashed, right, by the Fae. So it is really interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up because I do think it's important to establish like her views on the Fae are getting changed very quickly,
Yeah. Yeah.
despite the circumstances.
Despite the circumstances. And I think also she has a few moments of she keeps noticing his eye color,
Yeah,
the jade eyes, which is another classic Feyre and her paint colors, you know. But I think that's interesting. Like
yeah.
that's like a physical distance thing. Like you
Mm,
don't notice the color until that. And it kind of gives a humanistic moment, which is like a little creepy.
yeah,
And one more thing that I want to mention about this
yeah.
chapter is that so obviously in the chapter she decides she's gonna go with the beast
Mhm.
and sort of see what happens. Um, she immediately goes into business mode. She's
Yeah,
like, okay, the venison should hold you for 2 weeks. Start on the fresh meat. Remember I showed you how to make the jerky. Ugh, okay, there's money for the pellets, blah, blah, blah. If you need to do this, like, go talk to Isaac. He can help you. Just like immediately goes into business mode of just like, okay, how can I help my family like survive as long as they can? Because the oath is still so fucking strong. Because in the page before that, she literally is like trying to figure out. She's like, as long as the fairies couldn't find me, they couldn't hold me to the treaty. And this is when she's thinking about like trying to escape from the beast. Even if it made me a cursed oath breaker, but in going with him, I would be breaking the most important promise I've ever made. Surely it trumped an ancient treaty that I hadn't even signed. So like
yeah,
she's thinking, I'm going to go with him, but I'm going to run away because I don't care about this. I care about this oath that I made with my family. So while I'm trying to figure out how to escape, Dad, here's X, Y, Z. And then she tells Nesta not to marry Tom.
I knew you were going to bring that up, and I'm so happy because I wrote that down too. Like, it's not just business, like immediate business mode of like surviving the now. It's surviving forever,
Yeah.
basically. Like, and the part that just broke my heart was when she says, his father beats his wife, and none of his sons do anything to stop it. Bruises are harder to conceal than poverty.
Dude,
Like,
that's just like a quote that should just like be in the world. Cause
yes.
that's some fucking gospel she just put on your asses in that
Yeah.
moment. It's like, take me to church. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. And Nesta's like taken aback by
Oh
that.
yeah.
Like she's like, whoa, like that's
Yeah.
some hardcore wisdom,
Hardcore.
right? My note for it was just woof. Like it's, and
I
it
know.
just shows how good of a daughter and how good of a sister she
Fucking
is.
Feyre, dude. Like,
Yep.
seriously, it's so funny because obviously this is like my 4th reread. And God, I fall in love with her more every
I know.
single time I read it. Like, it's fucking insane. I'm sorry, I know we're going really long on this chapter and it's not
No,
that
it's
very
okay.
long, but I realized so there's actually a sound description in this
Yeah.
first chapter that I really, really love. It evoked a lot from me personally.
Do you want to like explain this little thing we're gonna start doing in the
Sure.
episodes?
So I think we talked about in the first episode that Ariel is a writer, director, and I am a sound recordist for film. Very specifically, I'm a boom operator. I hold the stick with the mic at the end. If people have seen behind the scenes photos of things. Anyway, so I record sounds and I'm just a big overall sound gatherer. Anyone who's spent a certain amount of time with me, if I find something that makes a really cool sound, I will record it and it will happen.
I'll never forget you running off into the woods to chase a frog while we were recording the sounds for my thesis film. And I was like, Corinne, don't get lost in the woods.
I can't remember if I ever got it. Did I get it?
I don't think you
I
did.
don't think
I
I
think you
did.
chased it for a while
I
and
think I
then we're
did.
like, I couldn't
I
get
think
it.
I probably chased it away, honestly. So because of these two worlds that we love and we exist in, we thought it would be cool if we ever felt moved by the spirit
Of cinema.
of cinema, that we're not going to force it, but basically what we're going to do is, if Ariel sees something in the collection of chapters we've decided to read for that week that really inspires her little writer director brain, that's going to be her favorite screenwriting moment of the week. And then I'll do the same. If there's a sound description that Mama Math has written in that just really inspires me, that'll be my favorite sound description of the week. Like I said, we're not going to force it. If we get moved, we'll bring it up. And if not, it just won't happen. My one specifically for this week was the end of chapter 4. And it's literally the last sentence. And it says, I let the sounds of the snow crunching underfoot drive out my father's words as I follow the beast to the night-shrouded woods.
Oh my God, Corinne.
Oh my God.
I for sure thought you were gonna do the sound of like when the beast is like roaring and is
Yeah.
like murder. But of course, you being you, and this is why I love you so much and want you to work on all my projects for all time. It being this like sound of like the snow crunching as
Yep.
like her dad's fit. Like, you're brilliant.
No, thank you.
I love it.
Well, because she doesn't give a lot of description to the roar. I thought the roar was going to be what I was going to choose for this week as well. But she doesn't describe it. Like she doesn't kind of, I mean, she says that it's low and it's classic beast, whatever anyone's going to think. I just thought this one was so powerful because it's so, Feyre is, there's no way that she can't still hear her dad talking.
Yeah.
But she is selectively choosing to zero in on the crunching of her feet, the crunching of the 4 pads of the beast next to her crunching. Like, that's what she's going to focus on. And anyone who has walked in snow that hasn't been walked in yet, you know exactly what that sounded. There's kind of like a squeak to it while you're crunching in, and it's weirdly loud while also somehow being at a very low level. It's like a very interesting experience, and it's just so Feyre. I mean, it's like I said, she is selectively zeroing in on this specific crunch. And I think I chose it too because like you can hear it. You can actually hear it when you read it. Like you can, even if you're not super audiophile, whatever. I mean, not quite, unless you've never been around snow, then like, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Like, yeah, but it's a very specific crunch. And I just think it was just like such a crazy moment of like, whoa, this is Feyre being like, done, moving forward to this next thing I need to worry about.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you'd have a lot of fun in the next chapter because it's like all going through the snow.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to like kind of power through this one because it's very short and we don't get we get some more establishing of the world. So for instance, we learn more about this wall, right? Which I think the wall got like very briefly mentioned in like chapter 3. But we know it now, it's an invisible wall. It's the wall that separates Prithian from the human worlds, which, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like no name for the human worlds, right? I think it's literally just
I literally think it's human realms.
Yeah.
Like I don't
Mortal Lands.
Mortal Lands. Yeah.
If you have a copy of the book, you know, there's this handy dandy little map that she provides, which, having just bought a physical copy of the book for the first time ever recently, it's so fun. I mean, I'd seen it online, but I didn't know there was like an actual official map. So that's interesting. Yeah, so we get that there's a wall, which I feel is very Game of Thrones inspired, probably. I feel like she's very much inspired by that series. We also get, let me see, on page 44, we get this is like one of the more info dumpy moments of the first few chapters. So, as far as we knew, the High Fae still governed the northern parts of our world. From our enormous islands over the narrow sea separating us from the massive continent, across depthless fjords, I think is how you say that,
Yeah.
and frozen wastelands and sandblasted deserts, all the way to the great ocean on the other side. Some fairy territories were empires, some were overseen by kings and queens. Then there were places like Prythian, divided and ruled by 7 high lords, being of such unyielding power that legends claimed they could level buildings, break apart armies, and butcher you before you could think. So that's really important. We get like
Mhm.
more of the politics of Prythian. So we get that the Mortal Lands, they're the southernmost part of this island, I guess, because it's not a continent. That's where the Mortal Lands are, and then the vast majority of the rest of this big island is Prythian.
Yep.
And it's divided into 7 parts, and each of those 7 parts is overseen by a fairy
Or High Lord.
high lord. Yes, couldn't remember if she said that or not yet. But yeah,
Yeah.
high lord. We will learn more about that later, but
Yeah.
it's good to know that now.
Yeah.
The other thing I found really interesting that gets established at the end of this chapter, because basically this chapter is just going from her home to the wall, right?
Yeah, and I mean it's
Almost to the wall.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I literally just wrote one big title for this chapter and I said the unraveling.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty much Feyre, like she's on a journey, right? And the beast won't talk to her. So she's doing the mental thing that we do when we're stuck, very classic like female thing as well.
Yeah.
Where she's doing this back and forth of like kind of sickly like loving that her family is gonna have to admit how much shit she does when she's there, while then also very quickly jumping to like, fuck, are they gonna survive? Like, how is this even gonna go? Like, how far do I have to go till we get to his lands, and his lands? Like, what? How big is this? Like, also just this whole idea of like, she knows nothing of what she's about to walk into, of what it's gonna look like. She has literally no clue. Like, all you kind of learn too that like humans only really know like these like horror stories that are told to children, and she kind of like shoves that into us a little bit more in this chapter.
Well, one thing you brought up that I wrote down a quote for when you brought up like her thinking about her family. I found one of the quotes I found the most interesting in this chapter was she says on page 45, I altered between a wretched smugness at the thought of my family starving and thus realizing how important I was, and a blinding agony at the thought of my father begging in the street, his ruined leg giving out as he stumbled from person to person. Like, just the whiplash of emotion she's going through. And like, I get it. Like,
totally.
She has the right to feel that smugness after everything she's done for them. But then this immediate feeling of guilt and sadness of, oh, but then that means they're going to have to do this, right? Like, that was really interesting. And I think telling, one thing I just want to talk about briefly that I've seen, like I said, I only read ACOTAR back in October. It's now March. So I've been part of the community for a very short period of time, but I have seen a lot of people talk online about their differing opinions about multiple characters, but including Feyre. And one thing I have found really interesting about these online spaces is there seems to be a certain sect of people who, from my assessment, want a perfect character, right? Like a flawless, perfect character, whether it's the female heroine or the male romantic lead or whoever. And that's what I love about Sarah J. Maas's books is no one is exactly good or exactly bad. They're always somewhere in the middle. Obviously, they can go towards one extreme or the other. But even Feyre, right, who is our heroine of this book, she has these very human moments of being like, yeah, I feel smug as shit that my family is now realizing that they're nothing without me.
Yeah.
Like, that is a shitty thought.
Yeah.
But it's also a very warranted thought.
So warranted.
Right?
So real. So relatable. So completely understandable. Yeah, I completely agree. And that I love that Sarah puts this kind of stuff in with the characters, because it's like, Feyre has been fucking.
I think it's those are the most relatable moments, is like when these characters that we love sometimes have really bad thoughts or do bad things, right? And like I know fantasy is meant to, especially romance is meant to escape into, which is why we love reading it, but like I don't want perfect characters,
No.
right? Like that's just boring, you know? So I thought that was a really fun little moment of like it revealed something about her character that I think wouldn't necessarily be in every book, you know?
No, and I actually like I don't like I steer away from the fantasy where people are like perfect.
Yeah.
That's not yes, I use fantasy to escape, but subconsciously I'm very aware that I am reading social commentary, that I am reading discussions of human minds and actions and things.
Yeah.
And it's just because of the way my brain works and because of any past traumas or whatever that I have, it's more palpable for me to read about in a fantasy or sci-fi space. And so yeah, I think that's also why though ACOTAR has touched so many people is that everyone can find themselves at one point or another. Cuz I would honestly argue I don't necessarily know if that moment of her saying I'm feeling a little smug or what I don't know if that's necessarily like that bad of a thought.
No. No,
It's
it's not
it's
terrible, but
more of
it's like,
how you respond to your thoughts and how you
yeah.
act on your thoughts. And it's this awareness that Feyre has of like the smugness is yes, it's not great. But this awareness that her family will kind of have to like appreciate her a little bit more. I don't personally see anything wrong with that. So,
Yeah.
and maybe this is like exposing some of my flaws, but like I think part of what the ACOTAR series I know it did for me personally is it made me stop punishing myself so much. It made me
Mm,
realize these thoughts I'm having, they're not necessarily bad.
they're human.
They're human. They're just an outlook of a moment.
Yeah.
And it's how I take that thought and it's how I move forward that actually shows what kind of person I am. And so
Well, and I
yeah.
think, yeah, I think another moment like that in this chapter, a very human moment she has that really sets up for the next chapters is on page 46. She says, "My prison or my salvation, I
Mm,
couldn't decide which." And this is when Feyre is arriving at the estate. And we'll see this more. I think we see it again in the next chapter where she immediately starts flipping between like, is this Faye my prisoner or is he
mhm.
my savior?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's we're gonna see this throughout the book, right? Like, and I think it's a really this is the human in Feyre, right? Like this is a human who was taken out of, as we talked about last week, severe poverty.
Yeah.
She is for the majority of her life just known hardship. And then this Faye kidnaps her. And as we find out in the next chapter, he brings her to this beautiful land, right?
Yeah.
Which she's not
Oh,
expecting.
yeah.
It's a very interesting and I think human moment of, I think it just kind of reminded me, I think a lot of people, I know I'm mostly speaking to the people who have read the book before. Thorns and Roses, I would say, is the least loved book of the ACOTAR series. And readers who haven't read the whole series, you will see why in the next book.
Yeah.
But it kind of reminded me that this book has a very intentional place in within the series. It sets, I mean, obviously it sets up the whole series, but what it's discussing, especially when you do a reread of it, is so important. And I know this book allowed me to forgive myself for
Mm,
um, one very particular moment in my life. We'll
mm,
talk about it more in the spoiler
yeah.
section, but it's a it reminds us that we're all human
Mhm,
and we make mistakes.
mhm.
And sometimes those mistakes aren't even necessarily our fault,
Right.
right? And so this moment of, I mean, like, I think you may have even brought this term up last week of Stockholm syndrome,
Yeah.
right? Like, we're starting to go into some Stockholm syndrome territory of like my prisoner or my savior,
Right.
right? And she's already having that, having just been kidnapped,
Right.
like, I don't know, a few hours ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I found that really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. She has this line where she says, like, I'd killed his friend after all.
Yeah.
And it's like after she's like asking him for his name, or that like but he's kind of being rude to her, or he's ignoring her, and her response in her brain is like, well, I did kill his friend. And so I think that's another moment of Feyre just kind of being like, I mean, like, this is fair how I'm being treated. Like,
Yeah.
I think we would all have the complete right to feel 100% indignation if Feyre had just gotten swooped out of her house in the middle of the night for no fucking reason. But
Right.
but Sarah J. Maas puts us in like this really kind of complicated spot where you're sort of like, no, don't take Feyre, but well, she did skin your friend. Okay, so actually, thanks for not killing her. And wait, you mean you're gonna take her out of this little hovel? Like, Like, I remember when I first read the book, this whole chapter where she was going off to this new land, I was like, please do the fantasy thing, please. Like, yes, because I don't really want to be with her in this destitute. Like, I'm gonna be a picky little bitch, and I don't want to be in this shitty hovel anymore. Can we get out? Like,
Well,
please.
she doesn't even want to be like,
Yeah,
you
but
know. So
I'm all like, because she's all trying to figure out how to escape in this chapter, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, but like, what if where you're going is really cool?
well, and a great segue into chapter 6. It
Yeah.
ends up being really cool. So,
Although, wait, him knocking her out is not.
oh, that is, yes. So before we get to that, yeah, he knocks her out with magic. Oh, this was the last thing I actually wanted to talk about. So, because it gets brought up a lot, magic has a smell to it. And
Yeah.
it's specifically a metallic tang,
A metallic tang.
which I find interesting. And I don't know why I hadn't thought about this until the reread. It smells like blood, if you think about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which I'm like, whoa.
Whoa.
And like, that has, I feel, such a dual meaning to it, right? Of like, on the one hand, like, my first thought was like, oh, that's bad. Like, why does it, like, I think nosebleed, right? Like, that's not good. But then blood is also life at the same time. Like, you can't survive without blood, like, whether you're human or fae. Like, so I find it really interesting that, and you'll see this phrase, like, new readers to Sarah J. Maas, she uses a lot of terms repetitively throughout. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes like it's for a purpose. Like, she always describes the smell of magic as a metallic.
She does.
You'll hear this a lot. So
also the fact that Feyre has this moment where she said, I recognize the power deep in my bones from some collective mortal memory and terror.
Yeah.
Like, what?
I mean, I think it's, I could go on a whole thing about like, passed down trauma and stuff like that. So I have a feeling that like she's referring to like the trauma her ancestors faced, like when 500 years ago,
when the fairies had them as slaves and like all this kind of stuff. Like, I just had this moment where I was like, is this some like weird like spoiler moment I should have like clocked in on?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But it was just sort of this like really interesting of like, okay, like, fuck, that's fucking heavy,
right?
Like that's heavy.
No, that is heavy. But so you brought up, he knocks her out, and then she wakes up 2 days later in this beautiful land in chapter 6.
We did it. We made it to chapter 6.
We made it. I had forgotten to do my homework of coming up with a screenwriting moment, but I think if I were to choose one for these chapters we read, it would be the very beginning of chapter 6, where she says, it's literally the first sentence of chapter 6, the estate sprawled across a rolling green land. I'd never seen anything like it. Even our former manor couldn't compare. It was veiled in roses and ivy, with patios and balconies and staircases sprouting from its alabaster sides. The grounds were encased by woods, but stretched so far that I could barely see the distant line of the forest. So much color, so much sunlight and movement and texture. I could hardly drink it in fast enough. To paint it would be useless, would never do it justice. I mean, like, this is iconic, right? Like, it's eternal spring she establishes here, though. Whereas when she was back home, it was winter. So that is like
snowing. Remember the snow crunch?
The snow crunch. So it's very noteworthy that like we're in this beautiful somehow spring land, and she even mentions at one point like
green like land.
Right. She even mentions at one point, I don't think I wrote it down, but like
the cloud.
How do they wield power
Oh yeah.
over the seasons. Like,
Yeah,
what
the
the
weather.
fuck?
Yeah, she's like, what the
Yeah.
fuck? And I think she even mentions like she can't remember the last time she can't remember the last time she saw like a blue sky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's this night and day moment for her of like going from just like complete and total survival mode in like the most destitute place and circumstance to suddenly this like manor that's even more beautiful than the one that they lived in when they were rich,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When they had wealth. It's like unfathomable to her. And she's kind of like, what the fuck? So like just imagining in my head like how I would write that, how I would direct it would be, it would be so interesting, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like pretty much always the first thing I think about is color.
Mm.
Color, like to me, holds a lot of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I just picture, you know, so much green and pink and just like flowery colors and the bright blue sky and whatnot. And then just like this pale gray Feyre wearing like I'm picturing like almost like a potato sack type of outfit, like just the stark opposite of she looks like even more sickly compared to her surroundings. And I mean, even later when we meet Alice, who goes and dresses her and everything, like just the stark contrast of how Feyre looks compared to her surroundings, especially when you know, the beast transforms back into Faye. You know, we meet someone else. Like just seeing that juxtaposition, I think would be so cool. I think I would have a field day writing that on the page and then getting to direct it.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I feel like I'm just gonna like do almost the exact same compliment back to you, just like, and this is why I will work on every single project that Ariel does, because I had never thought about the juxtaposition of the land to what Feyre looks like.
Yeah.
And what's so I can see that moment of like this like almost like wide shot or something
Yeah.
of the manor, and then all of a sudden you see this like woman come through who like at this point you're like looking at as a very like as a heroine, you're looking at her this like badass, and then to see her all of a sudden you're like whoa, whoa, whoa. And also like she talks about how the tang is the metallic tang is like in the air everywhere, so like she is
Yeah.
surrounded by magic, and she's just this fucking little gangly mortal just like walking through just dirty as hell and like barely eaten. And she also talks about, she says, because right after that awesome paragraph that you just said, she literally says, my awe might have subdued my fear had the place not been so wholly empty and silent.
Yeah. It's very
So
quiet.
empty.
Like, and I feel like it's a different quiet than the quiet she's used to of like the woods where it's like quiet can mean either survival or death if something's
Yeah.
stalking her versus like the quiet of here is peaceful, right?
Oh, he took her fucking weapon, which
Oh
means
yeah.
he tore through her cloak when she was unconscious. Ugh. No, don't like it.
Yep.
I don't like it at
No,
all. I don't like
not
it.
liking that.
I
That
don't
that
like
is
it.
one thing. That's a point against the beast right now.
100%.
But I will say he does redeem himself a little bit later once we get inside his manor because he feeds her, right? Like she gets the first thing he does is he takes her to the dining room, and then there's just array of delicious food. And she's taken aback by this because like she, for some reason, and it's so funny to kind of like hear what the humans think Faye do and don't do. Like she doesn't say what she thinks they eat, but she just doesn't
She
think they would
doesn't.
eat human food,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. She's like surprised by, oh, she's like, oh, it's all food I
Yeah.
recognize. You're like,
Right.
bitch, what the fuck do you think they eat?
Which I mean, I get because like, I mean, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I have a feeling they probably think they eat humans or something,
I
right?
mean,
Like, or
it's,
something
well,
weird at
and
least.
some of the other fairies, other types of fairies do. Like,
Yeah.
so, like, it's
Yeah.
totally, because, like, and yeah, so it makes sense that she's, like, kind of confused. But I think one of the craziest things of this chapter is that you discover that the beast is a shapeshifter and that he can turn into a
Yeah.
male. So for those of you who haven't read like a shit ton of fairy stuff like I have, you don't say man because that
Right.
is human. When you are discussing, it's so funny, when you're discussing fairy men, you call them males because they're not human. So anyway, what you'll see it throughout the book. There's some like little jokes and squabbles about
Can
it.
I say something about this? Because I'm so glad you brought this up, because it took me a hot minute reading the first book to understand that. And I'm someone in like real life. One of my I think it goes beyond a pet peeve. It actually really bothers me is when people refer to specifically women as females. Because and this is before, and actually I won't go on too much of a rant about it. That is actually very much rooted in racism.
Oh God.
So Black women, when Black people were enslaved, they were not referred to as women. They were referred to as females.
Because they weren't human.
Like,
they were
because they
below
weren't considered
human.
Yes, it's
Blech.
very much rooted in racism. But even before I knew that, there was something that always bothered me about it. It's like, I think I felt that feeling of like, oh, you're not thinking of this woman or girl as a human. You're thinking of them
human.
as something not human.
Cattle.
And so, yeah. And so that's always bothered me. So for like, before I realized that's what was going on, I was like, what the fuck, Sarah J. Maas?
Yeah.
Like,
why does she keep saying females and males? Yeah.
And then it dawned on me, I'm like, oh, it's
because they're not human. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And they're
So
not.
I'm glad you clarified.
Yes, that is the clarification. It's because they are not human. Sarah J. Maas, especially in this book, it's a very binary world. So there are males and there are females. So yeah, we discover that he is a male. And he sounds kind of pretty.
Very pretty.
Very pretty. It's giving like Thor, but not quite. I imagine him like Thor, but not quite as hulky. Because I don't feel like she says that he's like super wide or anything.
Green eyes,
golden hair. He sounds very dreamy.
Yeah.
But there's a mask.
Mm-hmm.
And then we meet a friend,
which we can say his name because they say it.
Yeah, Lucian. We meet Lucian, redhead, which I have always had a thing for redheads. So very excited to see the redheaded community represented.
Let me just say, the Lucian girlies, they're kind of my favorite in some ways, because like I feel they're a little more obscure than like the other
and they're really...
girlies. And when I say girlies, I mean of all genders.
Oh yeah, of all genders. Yeah.
That's fully encompassing. But like the Lucian girlies always give me a little giggle. I'm like, you're so hardcore about him.
They're really hardcore, and I really love it. Like I love how hardcore they are. I'm like, yes. Just fucking wave it. Just scream it to the mountaintops. But yeah, so, and then this Lucian character also has a mask.
Yes.
Also has a golden orb for an eye. With like a gnarly scar, which is kind of crazy. So the world has turned, right? All of a sudden this beast has turned into this male, which is also very much giving Beast from Beauty and the Beast. And I mean, I feel like immediately my little fantasy brain is just like, ooh, cool. So what's gonna happen here? You know, like your little, especially if you have any experience in romantasy, your brain is like, what's gonna happen? Like, this is exciting. Yeah.
We also get some more important information of like what their status in this realm is. So the beast, whose name we do not know yet.
Yeah.
He is both High Fae, which that's the ruling class of the Fae world. Like, so he is somewhat important.
Yeah.
And based on what he's wearing, he's also a warrior. So that's really important. And then when Lucian introduces himself, he says, I'm Lucian, courtier and emissary. So we know that he is an emissary to other courts.
Yeah.
So that's really important. The other important thing we get is the name of the wolf that Feyre killed, which is Andres. And we know that Andres is friends with our beast and Lucian. And Lucian is big mad
about
Andres dying.
Yeah.
Like he immediately hates Feyre.
Yep.
Like, he comes in hot.
Well, and I think it's also pretty important because it's a lot like what I think I brought up in the last chapter of like, we're really starting to get more of this understanding of how fairies feel about humans. Where he
Yes.
says, "Did you enjoy killing my friend, human?" The red-haired one said, "Did you hesitate, or was the hatred in your heart riding you too hard to consider sparing him? It must have been so satisfying for a small mortal thing like you to take him down."
Yeah. And it's so interesting because, like, at this point, we've sympathized with the humans for the most part, right? Like, we've learned all this history about how they were enslaved by the Fae are evil, blah, blah, blah. And then we're really kind of like you were talking about in chapter 4, where we start to like really kind of feel for the Fae of like, oh yeah, she did kill his friend. Like, we're getting that more in
Yeah.
like a much, even though like the beast was in his beast form when he first talked to Feyre about it, I would say Lucian comes in kind of hotter
Yeah.
than the beast of like, he really rails into her
Yeah.
to the point where like I almost want to be like, I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Lucia, even though I obviously didn't do anything. Like, you feel bad for these people, even though like they have so much more wealth than Feyre. They are of higher status. Like, they have everything Feyre doesn't, but they lost a friend.
Yeah.
And Feyre can't say the same.
Exactly. I mean, and talk about going back to just like staying in this like incredible gray zone of just like, because she didn't even like eat the meat. She sold the pelt for like, what did she even get?
She did
I mean,
get
she
more
got
than
she got like a lot of money, which
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, we did get to be with that incredible mercenary, so
Yeah.
you know, but like, if you really think about it, it's like what Feyre got out of it.
Yeah.
It's just it's really hard because
Yeah.
we're so Feyre. Like, we are on her team, but this is like a really rough moment of just like, especially when he says like, "Did you enjoy killing my friend?" Fuck,
Yeah.
bro. That's
Yeah.
hard, man. That's fucking deep, man. Like, like that,
Well,
like that
it's
just
turning
gets you in the gut, and you're like, dude, and she skinned him too.
it's turning the tables in a lot of ways because like, on the one hand, before we met any Fae, we understand why, because remember, Feyre, when she killed that wolf,
Yeah,
she knew there was a possibility he was Fae.
she
Like,
did.
she knew.
Yeah,
That's why she uses the ash arrow. And at that moment in the book, you're like, yeah, of course you're gonna kill a Fae because
of
like
course.
they're terrible. They
Yeah,
enslaved you, like your ancestors, like they're monsters. And then when you realize, oh, maybe, I mean, I think I even wrote down, yeah, she says on page 55, the few stories I'd heard had been wrong, or 500 years of separation had muddled them. Like, you're starting to realize history. It's so interesting because, like, there's that phrase of like history is written by the victors.
yeah,
And we're kind of seeing that even though the Fae were the victors in this war in a lot of ways, they were still painted as not great. And there's legitimate reasons for it.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong, and we find those out later, but it doesn't mean they're all bad.
Right. It's the
And that's
gray.
interesting. Yeah, it's the gray.
Okay, so the food.
Yes.
We have another moment where we get a little like, okay, this is what mortals know about fairies. And basically we learn like, okay, she is not supposed to eat the food because it will ensnare her into some other, like, let's see, what did she say? She said, all that hot, glorious food that I couldn't eat. This was the first rule we were taught as children, usually in songs or chants. If misfortune forced you to keep company with a fairy, you never drank their wine, never ate their food, ever, unless you wanted to wind up enslaved to them in mind and soul.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of get a little like, okay, here's another piece of information that she knows. But then we have this moment where the beast, as we're calling him for now, he tells her the food is fine and it's totally safe for humans. Which we're like, okay, can we trust him? But there's that other thing where Feyre said that fairies can't lie. So then, but then if we start not trusting that she can't eat the food, does that mean fairies can lie? So like we're kind of getting into this other gray kind of murky zone of just like,
Yeah.
wow, you guys like don't really know, or at least it seems like humans don't really fucking know anything about the Fae. So we're back in this spot of like, ugh, like what are we gonna do? And also, that also goes into the fact of like, she realizes when she sees the manor, she says this whole thing where she talks about how she knew that Fae used to like create temples for themselves and they would make all these things, but that humans, you know, destroyed them out of spite, like after the wars and stuff. But that she realized, like slowly, she was like, wait, I don't really know what modern, like what they're gonna look, where they live now. And so like we're back in this space where it's like humans have really either been actively kept in the dark, actively kept themselves in the dark. You also kind of come to this other question of like these humans who have stayed on this island when there's other mortal realms. You're a little like, why did you guys stay? And she even kind of has that moment in chapter 5 where she's like, fucking fools. Like, why did they stay? So there's just a lot of, you're like, okay, so humans actually don't have a shit ton of information. No. And he also the beast also follows that moment up of like, hey, like leave if you want. I'm not your jailer. The gates are open. You can live anywhere in Prithian.
Yes.
So it's this really weird thing too, where you're like, okay, so she doesn't have to stay here. And then if he's telling her she doesn't have to stay, why would he poison the food? That wouldn't really make any sense. So like we're back in this zone where we're like, what is this guy doing? All we accurately know about him right now is that he sounds hot. Like that's right. And that he's powerful. Like everything else, we're just kind of like, ugh. There's also this moment where Feyre is like, oh, I have a room, not a cell. She keeps waiting to hear like sounds of distress of like people being tortured and like all this stuff. Yeah. She does not hear any of that. In fact, at one point she mentions that she hears birds. Yeah. So obviously there's not a lot of torment happening. The one other little moment that we get a little look-see into the beast is when he's talking to Lucian. And they're talking about Andres. And, you know, Lucian's like, no way that she killed Andres. And then the beast goes, she admitted to it, the golden-haired one said tightly, tracing the rim of his goblet with a finger. A long lethal claw slid out, scraping against the metal. For me, this is a very important moment because it's a little look-see in that he doesn't have a ton of control over his anger. Yeah. That is him having a slight moment of shape-shifting due to his anger and his sadness or what have you. But like one of his claws slips out just because he's talking about like that's kind of a moment of giving you this like insight of like, okay, he may have some anger issues here. He clearly doesn't have like a shit ton of control over his shape-shifting moments, which like I'm very 50-50. Part of me is like, that's fucking hot. And then this other part of me is like, that's fucking terrifying. So I don't know. She gives us a nice little blurb into like, okay, who is this guy? But we still don't really have a ton of knowledge about him. But he does give her Alice, and Alice is dope as hell.
Yes. Well, yeah, that kind of goes back to like how wealthy he not only has this huge manor with like all these beautiful things. Like at one point, I think she even says like the curtains cost as much as like what could feed her family their entire lifetime. Yep. But he also has servants, right? Of which include Alice. And so Alice is kind of assigned to Feyre. She bathes her. I love Alice because she's kind of just like right to the point. She's cut the bullshit. Yeah. Like, you don't want to wear this dress? Okay, I'll go get your clothes. They're falling apart, right? Yeah. But the thing I love about Alice, I think the most, is at the very end of the chapter on page 57, she says, and keep your wits about you. Even your senses will betray you here. And that, I think, new readers, just remember that line for this whole book. Yeah. Even going, I would say, into the next book. It's a line that really flies under the radar, I think, for the most part. So
yes. And it is definitely one to remember. And I think also Alice has that moment too where she basically reminds Feyre that Feyre has like a bullseye on her because she killed Andres. Like, yes. I think that's the other thing too, is it's like this really weird reminder of like, you may think that you're this like weak little human, but in our eyes here, you killed some people's friend.
Yeah.
So like be aware, but side note, give Lucian a bunch of shit because he deserves it. Like I love how she throws in this extra little thing at the end of just like he deserves to get like slapped around a little bit. I also think it's fucking cool as hell that after she puts her nose up at all these gowns and all these things, Alice comes back with some fucking pants and a fucking tunic and is just like, fine, here. And like I just think that's so cool because how many fantasy books have I read where the badass hero is forced into a fucking gown because they can't, and she has to get like pants specialty made for her. Like I was so excited when I first read this book and I was like, you guys solved this problem in a fucking paragraph. Like love that. Alice is dope.
One thing I love about Sarah J. Maas books, and if you read Throne of Glass, you definitely know this. Like, she's such a fashion girly. Like, she loves fashion, and I love that about like as a Leo. I love that. And I think it's what characters wear. I'm coming at this from a film standpoint, right? But I think this applies to books as well. What characters wear, especially if they're forced to wear it or if they're wearing it willingly, is very telling about who they are as a person, just as it is in real life, right?
Yep.
So the fact that Feyre does choose a tunic and pants over a gown is really symbolic, I think. And we keep seeing that throughout this book and future books, right? There's a very big distinction, I think, in the Maasverse in general, at least her first two series, because Crescent City takes place in modern times.
Right.
Tunics versus dresses are very important.
Yeah.
And they come when a female character decides to wear a dress over a tunic or vice versa. Those tend to be very important moments in those books.
Yeah. And I think it circles back to this thing that we didn't quite talk about from this chapter of just like Feyre still trying to figure out how to escape. She's still trying to figure out how to. In fact, that's the only reason why she even goes inside the house. She's like, I need some fucking food. I can't escape. This is dumb. Yeah. Like, and even then when she's sitting in her bedroom, she's like, realizing that this room is bigger than her entire cottage. And all of a sudden she starts thinking about her family and she's like, oh my God, I've been gone for this many days. Are they still alive? What, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, I think the tunic is also this sort of reminder of like, our girl is still, she's not settling in. She's like, she's still trying to figure out how to get out.
Yeah. So that's kind of where chapter 6 ends. Yeah, this was so much fun. I'm so glad we're finally in Prithee. Like, it was fun talking about the first 3 chapters, but like, it's funny because we're actually now caught up to where when I did my first read through of ACOTAR, in the first sitting, I listened all the way through chapter definitely 6. I want to say maybe 7. So we're pretty much caught up with where I ended my first read.
Yeah, this was it's super fun. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because I always warn people that the beginning of ACOTAR it's kind of slow. It's especially when you see all this stuff on the internet about like where it kind of ends up going. You're like, what the fuck with the first couple chapters, but like it's totally worth it. Just and the building that she's creating, the foundation that she is building for you right now is so important to how you feel about the rest of the series. Most of the obsessions that people have would not exist if the beginning of the book wasn't like this. So just hold on.
Hold on. Although I will say, even the first time reading it, I remember you warning me. I was like, this isn't bad. And even reading it again, I'm like, yeah, sure. Compared to like what goes on in maybe like Akawar, sure.
Yeah.
But like, it's fun seeing all the things she plants.
Yes.
So early on.
Yes. And what's cool though is that it is totally fine and in fact normal to not remember or clock. Like this is not one of those books where you need to be annotating everything to understand what happens later. Like you don't. Sarah does a really great job of like reminding you the stuff you need to know and gathering you along. It's just gifts for when you reread.
I was gonna say, I would actually encourage to not
don't just go through and experience and enjoy. Especially this first book is very classic romantic-y fairy tale. So just enjoy.
And with that, we're going to go into the spoiler section now. But before we do, dear listeners, your homework for next week is chapters 7 through 10. We'll be discussing those. It's a little more reading than the last couple weeks, but there's some fun stuff that happens in those chapters, especially at the end of chapter 10. So to our newer readers, we bid you adieu. And
You're welcome.
we're sorry. See you next week.
Bye.